Mark Callahan was once the man everyone envied. Wealthy, respected, and seemingly devoted to his beautiful wife Jennifer and their two bright children, Ellie and Ryan. But behind the doors of their $5 million mansion, secrets were festering, and when Mark's empire collapsed overnight, he didn't just lose his fortune. He destroyed his family in the most chilling way imaginable. The Callahan family was everything people dreamed of being. Their life looked like something straight out of a magazine. Perfect, polished, and privileged. They lived in Crestwood Heights, a wealthy suburban neighborhood where the grass always looked greener and the sidewalks sparkled under sunlight. Their $5 million mansion sat at the end of a tree-lined street, gated, immaculate, and enormous. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a home theater, imported Italian furniture, and an infinity pool that seemed to spill into the sky. Everyone in town knew the Callahans, or at least thought they did. Mark Callahan was the man who made it all happen. A successful financial consultant with a reputation for turning average portfolios into gold, he had charm, confidence, and a ruthlessly analytical mind. He wore tailored suits, drove a black Maserati, and hosted whiskey tastings for his elite clients. His wife Jennifer was equally admired, graceful, always dressed to perfection. Though known for chairing charity events and baking pastries no one believed she actually made herself. Their children, Ellie and Ryan, were straight-A students. Ellie was a ballot prodigy, and Ryan was already being scouted for college baseball at 16. To the outside world, they were untouchable. A dream wrapped in wealth. Behind the marble walls, however, things were starting to crack. Mark had spent years taking high-stakes risks in secret. Though he preached discipline and strategy to his clients, his own financial behavior had grown reckless. He borrowed against their assets, moved money through offshore accounts, and made quiet deals no one else knew about. When those deals started to go wrong, he didn't slow down. He took bigger chances, determined to reverse the damage and keep up appearances. He believed he could outsmart the fall. As months passed, their lifestyle began to slip in subtle ways. A luxury vacation was postponed. A new car order was mysteriously cancelled. Mark dismissed it all with casual excuses, but Jennifer started noticing strange things. Credit card statements were shorter. Staff hours were reduced. One day, her favorite necklace, a piece she hadn't worn in months, was missing from the safe. Mark said he had sent it for cleaning. She believed him. Still, the signs grew louder. The calls from unknown numbers, the closed-door meetings in his home office that stretched late into the night, and the tension that clung to Mark's face like shadows he couldn't shake. He looked thinner, tired, and more withdrawn. Jennifer began to wonder if he was having an affair. What she didn't know was that he had already lost more than his reputation. He had lost control. The final blow came when the markets dipped and his most ambitious investment collapsed. Mark watched $5 million dissolve in front of him in less than an hour. That money wasn't just his own. It was tied to loans, mortgage extensions, and the very foundation of their house of cards. The bank had already been circling. Now, there was no more time to stall. Still, he kept everything quiet. He didn't tell Jennifer about the foreclosure notices. He didn't tell the kids that their college funds were gone. He smiled through dinners and told jokes at brunch. But every night he sat alone in his office, staring at spreadsheets like they were tombstones. The mansion, the cars, the designer clothes. They had all been bought with borrowed time. To the world, the Callahans were still the perfect family. They still waved to neighbors and hosted backyard barbecues. Mark still gave financial advice on local radio and posted motivational quotes about success on social media. But inside the house, the truth was suffocating. Jennifer could feel it in the air. Ellie and Ryan could see it in their father's eyes. Something was wrong, and no one wanted to say it out loud. They didn't know yet that their lives were already over. Not metaphorically, but literally. The countdown had started the moment the money vanished. And Mark, cornered by failure and pride, was about to make a decision that would shock the entire country. For now, the family went about their lives, unaware that they were living their final days in a mansion built on lies. The perfect image would soon shatter, and the name Callahan would no longer be associated with wealth or success, but with something far darker. Mark Callahan had built his empire on confidence, charm, and calculated risk. But now, sitting in his study with the curtains drawn tight and the soft hum of silence in the background, all of that felt like a distant illusion. The numbers didn't lie. His fortune was gone, The offshore investment that once promised double returns had crumbled after a political shake-up overseas. A series of leveraged trades, meant to recover the initial losses, only dragged him deeper into the abyss. Everything he had built was now held together by forged documents, temporary delays and bold-faced lies. In the early days of the crisis, Mark still believed he could fix it. He promised himself it was temporary, a rough patch that would soon pass. He moved money between accounts with surgical precision, sold off smaller assets, and borrowed more than he could ever repay. He even used Jennifer's signature without her knowledge to refinance the mansion. But none of it made a difference. The house was bleeding money. The interest alone on their debt had ballooned into the six figures. He hadn't had a real paycheck in months. Even worse, he had already spent the kids' college savings. When Ryan had mentioned visiting Stanford, Mark nodded along, knowing the application fee itself might bounce. Still, he smiled through it. His pride refused to allow even a hint of failure. He couldn't let his family know the truth. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Then the foreclosure notice came. A stark, official letter sealed in a plain envelope. It was short and cold like the end of a sentence. The house was to be repossessed in 30 days. No appeals, no extensions. Just a ticking clock. Mark hid the letter in a drawer beneath old tax returns. He couldn't bear to tell Jennifer. She had trusted him with everything. Their future, their finances, their home. He had promised her safety, stability, and comfort. Now, he had delivered ruin. He convinced himself it would only crush her. And what good would that do? She didn't need to know, not when he still had time to come up with something, anything. But reality had a way of slipping through cracks. One afternoon, Jennifer returned early from a charity luncheon and found two men walking through the front foyer, admiring the crown molding. One of them was holding a listing brochure. The house, it turned out, had already been placed on the market by the bank. Jennifer confronted him that evening. He didn't answer at first. He just stood at the kitchen sink, staring at the marble countertop like he could will it all to disappear. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to explain, it was to apologize. Not for one mistake, but for all of them. She demanded answers, and he gave them in fragments, each one worse than the last. The money was gone. The house was gone. The kids' savings were gone. She stood there in silence, staring at the man she had shared her life with. He had always been confident, composed, in control. Now he looked like a ghost in a suit, tired and broken. For a moment she didn't even recognize him. The next morning, Jennifer began packing. She told Ellie and Ryan only the basics, that there had been financial setbacks, and that they were moving out. The kids didn't ask many questions. They just looked numb. The mansion, once a place of celebration and pride, now echoed with emptiness. The laughter was gone. The warmth had vanished. The family was living among boxes and silence. Mark walked through the halls like a man waiting for a sentence to be carried out. His eyes lingered on each room, each memory, each corner of the house he had once believed would be his legacy. He watched his children carry photo albums and sports trophies to the car. He watched his wife quietly fold their wedding quilt and set it in a bin marked, "Keep." The final weekend arrived like a funeral. No guests, no goodbyes, just the sound of tape sealing cardboard and the low creak of wooden stairs. The family went through the motions, sharing one last dinner in a dining room that felt colder than ever. Mark told them he wanted to make the most of their final days in the house. One last breakfast on the terrace. One last walk through the backyard. One last swim in the pool. He said it was about closure, about remembering the good times. But in his mind, something else had begun to take shape. A thought that had started small like a whisper, now refused to leave him alone. If everything he loved was about to be taken away from him, the life, the image, the control, then maybe it would be better to decide how it ended. On his own terms. The idea was still unspoken, even to himself. But it was there, rooted deep. And by the time the sun set on that Sunday evening, it had already started to bloom. Sunday arrived like a curtain falling over the last act of a play no one wanted to watch. The Callahan mansion stood quiet under the morning sun, its grand windows reflecting a world that was no longer theirs. Inside, the mood was still, heavy, and slow. Jennifer moved from room to room, packing what little they could take. She had stopped crying by then. Her face was pale, her hands steady. Ellie spent most of the day in her bedroom, scrolling through old photos, silent and confused. Ryan kicked a ball around the backyard by himself, not saying a word. It didn't feel real to them. The mansion had always been there, unshakable, eternal. The idea of leaving it behind was impossible to grasp. Mark kept to himself most of the day. He watched his family from a distance, quiet and deliberate. He studied them like they were already gone. No one noticed that he wasn't helping with the packing. No one questioned the long hours he spent in his study, behind a locked door. At one point, he opened the family safe and removed a small black duffel bag. He carried it to the garage and placed it in the trunk of his car. He returned inside with a calm expression and a chilling sense of purpose. He insisted on one last family dinner in the formal dining room. Jennifer didn't argue. She cooked one of Mark's favorite meals: roast chicken with rosemary, mashed potatoes, and asparagus. The kind of dinner she used to prepare during better days. The kids sat at the table quiet, unsure how to act. Mark was unusually upbeat. He talked about moving forward, starting fresh, maybe even relocating to a new city. His voice was light, almost cheerful. But something about his tone didn't feel right. He wasn't talking to them like a man looking toward the future. He was talking like a man rehearsing a goodbye. That night, Mark stood at the edge of the pool in the backyard, looking down at his reflection. He thought about the moment he bought the house, the pride he had felt signing the papers, and the illusion of safety that came with it. He thought about his children being born, their birthdays, their first steps across that very lawn. He had spent years convincing himself that everything he did was for them. But somewhere along the way, the lies had overtaken the truth, and now all he could offer them was escape. Just after midnight, the mansion was dark. Jennifer had gone to bed early, exhausted. Ellie was listening to music in her room, and Ryan had fallen asleep with the TV still glowing in the background. Mark walked quietly down the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He retrieved the black duffel bag from the garage and brought it upstairs. Inside was a handgun, unregistered, purchased illegally through one of his former clients when he first sensed things falling apart. Security footage from a motion-activated camera near the staircase would later show Mark walking past it at 20:47 a.m., expressionless, with the bag slung over his shoulder. He moved like he was carrying out a routine task, not a horrifying decision. There was no panic, no hesitation, just grim resolve. The sequence of events inside the bedrooms will never be fully known. Investigators would determine that each family member was shot once, in their sleep, without signs of struggle. It was methodical, controlled. Cold. Jennifer was found in the master bedroom. Ellie and Ryan remained under their covers, untouched except for the single fatal wounds. When it was done, Mark stood in the middle of the hallway. The silence was complete. The mansion, once filled with the hum of life, had become a tomb. He walked down to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and stared out the window for almost an hour. At some point before dawn, he left. His car was gone by the time the movers arrived just before 9 a.m. They rang the doorbell. No answer. They called Jennifer. No reply. One of them knocked on a side window and noticed a dark smear on the floor inside. It looked like blood. They called the police. The discovery inside the house made national news within hours. A respected family wiped out without warning. The financial downfall, the mansion, the betrayal. It was all too surreal. But the biggest question remained: where was Mark Callahan? There was no sign of him, no body, no note left behind. Just an abandoned mansion, the echo of gunshots, and a growing sense that the man who had once stood at the top of everything had vanished into something far worse than failure. Police swarmed the Callahan mansion within minutes of the movers' frantic 911 call. Crime scene tape cordoned off the entire property as investigators moved through the house in stunned silence. The scene was haunting in its stillness. The smell of roast chicken still lingered faintly in the kitchen. A half-packed suitcase sat at the foot of Jennifer's bed. In each room, personal belongings were frozen in place, untouched reminders of lives that had ended without warning. Jennifer was found in the master bedroom, lying on her side as if she had fallen asleep mid-thought. A single gunshot to the head, no signs of a struggle. Ellie's body was discovered curled under a pink comforter, her phone still charging on the nightstand. Ryan, just a few steps away in his own room, had been killed in the same manner. Quiet, efficient. The family dog was unharmed, locked in the laundry room. A detail that, while small, deeply disturbed the lead detective. It meant Mark hadn't been in a frenzy. He had planned it, calmly, deliberately. The initial assumption was murder-suicide. But that theory quickly crumbled when Mark's body wasn't found. There was no suicide note, no spent shell casing near any other victim that could point to him taking his own life. His car was missing. So was his phone. His wallet, however, had been left behind on the kitchen counter with his ID neatly placed on top, almost as if he was signaling that he wouldn't need it anymore. For the next 48 hours, authorities launched a statewide manhunt. Helicopters scanned nearby woods. Highway patrol units were alerted. Checkpoints were set up at major exits. The case exploded in the media, painting Mark Callahan as a wealthy family man who had snapped after financial ruin. News outlets ran old family photos next to crime scene footage. Interviews with shocked neighbors filled the evening broadcasts. They were perfect. One woman sobbed to a reporter, "I just can't believe it." But the trail went cold almost immediately. Surveillance footage showed Mark's car heading north at 4:12 a.m., the morning of the murders, but after that there was nothing. No toll booth hits. No gas station receipts. No credit card activity. It was as if he had vanished into the night. His phone had been turned off minutes after he left the house, never to be reactivated. The investigators suspected he had planned his escape long before pulling the trigger. 3 days later, a park ranger in the Smoky Mountains discovered a black luxury sedan parked near a remote overlook. It matched the description of Mark's car. Inside, police found his blood-stained dress shirt, a torn family photo, and a half-empty bottle of sleeping pills. The gun used in the murders was missing, so was any trace of Mark. The overlook led to a steep cliffside that dropped into thick forest and jagged rocks below. It was assumed he had jumped, but after days of search and rescue efforts, no body was recovered. The official statement was that Mark Callahan had taken his own life after killing his wife and children, driven by shame and financial collapse. But not everyone believed that narrative. Forensic analysts pointed out that the blood on Mark's shirt was minimal, inconsistent with self-inflicted gunshot wounds. There were no witnesses, no suicide note, and the scene in the car felt, to some, too neatly staged. Whispers began to spread online. Reddit threads and amateur sleuth forums lit up with theories. Had he faked his death? Did he use one of his offshore accounts to vanish abroad? Old business associates described him as calculated and cold under pressure, not the type to break down and end things without a plan. The FBI quietly added him to their most wanted list under a sealed warrant. A red notice was issued with Interpol. His face was uploaded to facial recognition databases across airports worldwide. But months passed, then years. Tips came and went. A blurry security cam image in Arizona. A man in a Panama hotel lobby with a familiar jawline. A fisherman in Thailand swearing he saw a man matching Mark's profile drinking alone at a bar. None of it was confirmed. Meanwhile, the Crestwood Heights mansion remained vacant for nearly a year. Locals avoided it. Rumors of hauntings spread through the neighborhood. Eventually, the bank sold it to a development company that tore it down and replaced it with modern townhouses. The memory of the Callahans slowly faded from the street, but the story remained. It was too chilling to forget, too strange to dismiss. Mark Callahan had become a ghost, not just of a man, but of a father, a husband, a symbol of how far someone could fall when pride outweighed reason. Whether dead or hiding in plain sight, his presence continued to haunt everyone who had once believed his life was perfect. 5 years after the tragedy at the Callahan mansion, the case remained open, frozen in time like the photographs that once lined the family's hallway. The FBI had long since shifted its attention to newer priorities, but a small team of analysts continued to keep the file active, sifting through the occasional tip, reviewing old data, hoping for something, anything that would bring closure to the case. But no new evidence surfaced, no confirmed sightings, no trace of Mark Callahan. It was as if he had evaporated from the world the same night he destroyed his family. Public interest in the story faded, as all headlines do, replaced by new scandals and crimes. True crime podcasts retold the case in chilling detail, each with their own theory. Some believed Mark had jumped from the cliff, and his body had simply never been recovered. Others claimed he faked the scene entirely and escaped using a pre-planned route that started long before the murders took place. Private investigators were hired by distant relatives, but none uncovered anything concrete. The cliffside theory became the official story, even if it never quite satisfied everyone who looked closely. Behind the scenes, the FBI continued to treat the case as a possible fugitive hunt. Mark had the intelligence and resources to disappear. He was meticulous, financially savvy, and emotionally detached enough to carry out a calculated act of horror. Records later uncovered revealed that in the months leading up to the murders, Mark had liquidated small foreign investments, likely stashing cash in offshore accounts. He had also applied for multiple fake passports through black market channels under false names, using connections built during his financial career. The pieces painted a portrait of a man who hadn't snapped in a moment of despair, but rather someone who had planned every step in advance. Then, in a quiet Colombian cafe near the port city of Cartagena, something changed. A retired private investigator, Thomas Rigg, sat drinking coffee with his wife on vacation when he noticed a man at the far end of the cafe. Something about the posture, the narrowed eyes behind dark glasses, struck a chord in his memory. He discreetly took a photo and sent it to a former colleague back in the States who ran it through facial recognition software. The result? An 89% match to Mark Callahan. The image was grainy, taken through the reflection of a window, but it reignited interest in the case. Colombian authorities were contacted. By the time they arrived, the man was gone. Local vendors said he was a quiet expat who went by the name Simon Crane and paid in cash. He had been living there for over a year, renting a modest apartment above a bookstore, never drawing attention. Interpol and the FBI ramped up activity in the area, but the trail was already cold. The apartment was empty, stripped clean. The name, Simon Crane, turned up nothing official. Still, the possibility of Mark being alive reignited the media frenzy. News outlets revisited the case. Theories resurfaced. Social media lit up with debates. Some believed the cafe sighting was a hoax, a case of mistaken identity. Others saw it as undeniable proof that Mark Callahan had succeeded in doing the unthinkable, murdering his family and building a new life for himself in a foreign land. The development fueled a wave of public fascination. Documentaries were greenlit. True crime influencers picked apart every moment of the original timeline, every financial record, every distant cousin's memory. But behind the spectacle was a darker truth. 3 lives had been taken in cold blood. Jennifer, Ellie, and Ryan had become footnotes in a story dominated by their killer's escape. Their graves placed side by side in a small cemetery just outside of Crestwood Heights were rarely visited. The family's extended relatives had quietly distanced themselves. No memorials were held after the first year. Their deaths, tragic and brutal, had been overshadowed by the mystery that followed. To this day, Mark Callahan remains missing. The FBI refuses to confirm whether he is alive or dead. His face is still listed on international wanted databases, and his case sits on the desk of one agent who still reviews it monthly, out of routine more than hope. In the end, the Callahan case isn't just remembered for its brutality, but for its incompleteness. A story that never ended. A man who turned his back on everything he claimed to love and walked into a new identity. The mansion is gone. The neighbors have moved on. But the memory of the family who had it all, and lost everything, still lingers like a shadow that refuses to fade.